It's 3 a.m. You're not sleeping. You're lying there running the same calculations you ran at 11 p.m. and again at 1 a.m. The numbers aren't different now, you know that, but your brain keeps running them anyway. The car made a noise last week you haven't been able to identify. The laptop is slow in a way it wasn't 6 months ago. The last month was tight, tighter than expected, and you're not sure why, which almost makes it worse. This is what financial vulnerability actually feels like. Not bankruptcy, not catastrophe, just this, the low-level, persistent 3 a.m. version of being one thing away from a real problem. I want to talk about that feeling today, and I want to talk about a specific number that, in my own experience and in what I've read about the psychology of money, does something interesting to it. That number is $10,000, not $1 million, not financial independence, not early retirement. 10,000. And what I want to explain is why that specific amount, sitting in a separate account, not being spent on anything, does something to how you think and feel that goes well beyond the number itself. This is not financial advice. I'm a 38-year-old dad who works from home and thinks about money more than most people probably should. Take what's useful. Before I make the case for the $10,000 milestone, I want to describe what life looks like without it, concretely. Because I think most financial content skips past this too quickly and goes straight to the solution. The experience of living without a real financial buffer is a specific kind of mental state. And it's hard to fully understand it unless you've been in it, or unless you're in it right now. Every financial decision has extra weight, not just the big ones, the small ones too. The grocery store. The choice between the slightly more expensive version of something and the slightly cheaper one. The dinner invitation from friends and the mental calculation that follows. Can I do this without making next week harder? These aren't dramatic moments, but they happen constantly, dozens of times a day. And each one requires mental energy, a little calculation, a little assessment, a little stress. What this creates over time is a specific kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with physical tiredness. It's the exhaustion of managing scarcity, of playing defense with money every day without a real break. There's also a specific effect on risk tolerance that I think is under-discussed. When you have no buffer, every potential change in your life carries an extra risk premium. Taking a new job. What if there's a delay in the first paycheck? Asking for a promotion. What if it creates tension and somehow makes things worse? Moving somewhere better. What if the move costs more than expected? Any transition, any uncertainty, any decision with an unknown outcome carries this extra weight. Because you know that if it goes wrong, there's no margin. There's nowhere for the mistake to land except directly on your finances. This risk premium, the way scarcity makes every uncertain decision feel more dangerous, keeps people stuck in situations that aren't good for them. Not because they're afraid of change in a general sense, but because change, without a buffer, is genuinely riskier than it looks. I've felt this. The specific feeling of knowing that an opportunity is in front of you and not being able to fully engage with it because the downside isn't manageable. It's one of the things I remember most clearly about periods in my life when the buffer wasn't there. So what specifically happens when you hit $10,000 in a separate account? Not in terms of what you can buy, in terms of how things feel. The first shift, and this one surprised me when I first read the research on it, is physiological. Financial security measurably reduces cortisol levels. Cortisol is your body's primary stress hormone, the substance that prepares you for threat response. And when you're living without a financial buffer, your cortisol is elevated not dramatically, not in a crisis way, but chronically, persistently, at a level that's slightly above where it should be all the time. Accumulating a real financial buffer reduces this, not because you've solved every financial problem, but because the number of scenarios where a single event could immediately cascade into a genuine crisis has shrunk dramatically. Your body responds to that change, And that's not a metaphor, it's measurable biology. The second shift is in decision quality. There's a well-documented phenomenon called decision fatigue. The idea is simple. Making decisions costs mental energy. And the more decisions you make in a day, the worse your later decisions tend to be. Now apply this to someone managing daily life without a buffer. Every financial decision, and I mean every one, including the tiny ones that happen dozens of times a day, carries extra weight, extra calculation, extra risk assessment. Each one uses a small amount of mental energy. By evening, that energy is depleted, and the decisions made with depleted mental energy are worse, less considered, more reactive, more likely to create problems that compound over time. When you have $10,000 sitting in an account, roughly 90% of the daily micro-decisions stop requiring that calculation. You're not choosing the cheaper version of something because you're worried about the budget. You're choosing based on what you actually prefer. You're not calculating whether dinner with a friend is affordable. You're just deciding if you want to go. This frees up enormous amounts of mental energy across each day. And that energy can go somewhere useful, into work, into planning, into the kind of thinking that actually improves your situation rather than just managing it. The third shift is in how unexpected events land. Let me give you a specific example. Your car shows a warning light. If you're living without a buffer, this is a genuinely alarming event. Not just logistically, financially. You immediately start calculating. How bad could this be? How much might it cost? Could I put it on a card? Can I borrow from someone? What if it's something serious? The check engine light isn't just a car problem, it's a potential financial crisis. With $10,000 in the account, the same light comes on. You're still annoyed, nobody likes car problems. But the financial dimension of your reaction is completely different. You think, I need to get that looked at. You make an appointment, you deal with it. That shift from potential crisis to manageable inconvenience is hard to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it from both sides. But it's significant, and it happens across every unexpected event. The medical expense, the appliance that fails, the emergency that arrives without warning. With a buffer, these are problems. Without it, they're threats. I want to describe a moment that I think captures this better than any of the statistics. The first time I was in a grocery store, after genuinely having a real buffer established, not just a small amount, but an amount that felt like real security, I noticed something I hadn't expected. I was choosing what I wanted to eat, not what I could afford, what I wanted. The decision process was completely different. I was thinking about meals, about what sounded good, about what my kids would actually eat. I wasn't running a parallel calculation about the total, about whether one category was too expensive, about whether I needed to put something back. It was the same grocery store, the same products at the same prices, but the experience was fundamentally different. And I stood in an aisle for a moment, realizing something I couldn't fully articulate, that this was what shopping was supposed to feel like, that the other version, the calculated version, had been the experience so long it had become invisible, normal. The financial buffer didn't change the store, it changed the mental state I brought to it. I tell this story not because grocery shopping is the most important thing in the world. Obviously it isn't. But because I think it illustrates something that's hard to communicate in abstract terms. The benefit of a financial buffer isn't primarily what you can buy with it. Most people who build their first $10,000 don't spend it differently than before. The benefit is what it does to your relationship with ordinary life, the small moments, the daily decisions, the baseline level of ease or tension that underlies everything you do. That's what changes. And that change is so pervasive, so constant, and so quiet that most people don't fully register it until they've experienced both sides. Here's something that took me longer to understand than it should have. Building savings is not primarily a financial act. It's an identity act. What I mean is this. Most people who try to save money and fail aren't failing because they lack information about saving. They know they should save. The advice is everywhere. They've heard it many times. They're failing because they haven't made the shift from, I'm trying to save money, to, I'm someone who saves money. Those two things sound similar. They're not. The first is a behavior you're attempting. The second is an identity you've adopted. And identity shapes behavior in ways that conscious effort can't fully replicate. When you're trying to save money, every purchase decision is a contest between the desire to spend and the commitment to save. Every single one. And willpower is finite. You'll lose some of those contests. Over time, without the identity shift, you'll lose too many. When you're someone who saves money, the question changes. It's not, should I save this or spend it? It's, what would someone like me do here? And that's a much easier question to answer. The interesting thing about building toward $10,000 specifically is that the process itself tends to produce this identity shift, if you approach it the right way. Each month that you contribute something, each time you choose not to spend money that could have been saved, each time you check the account and see it growing, even slowly, you're producing evidence about who you are. Evidence that you're the kind of person who does this. And evidence accumulates. Identity consolidates. The habit becomes less effortful because it's less contested. I'm not describing this as though it's easy. The first 1,000 is genuinely hard. It requires real decisions, real trade-offs, real friction. But the second 1,000 is slightly easier. And by the time you're working toward the 6th or 7th, something has shifted. The saving is less a discipline you're imposing on yourself and more a habit that runs in the background. The identity change happens somewhere in the middle. And that change, not the money itself, is what makes future wealth building more likely. Let me be concrete about what this amount actually covers, because I think the practical dimension matters. $10,000 handles the vast majority of financial emergencies that keep people stuck. Car repairs. Most automotive problems, short of needing a replacement engine, fall well under $5,000, often under $2,000. Medical expenses. For people without comprehensive insurance, most urgent care visits, emergency room trips, and minor procedures fit within this range. Major surgery is a different category. $10,000 won't cover everything, but it handles a significant portion of what actually comes up. Job loss. Depending on your monthly expenses, $10,000 buys somewhere between 3 and 6 months of runway. That's meaningful. It's enough time to look properly for the right opportunity, rather than desperately accepting the first thing available. There's a specific difference between a job search conducted from financial security and one conducted from financial panic. The person with runway can be selective, they can negotiate, they can wait for something that actually fits. The person without runway takes what's there. That difference over a career compresses into something significant. But here's the part I find genuinely interesting. Most of the people I've read about and spoken to who built their first $10,000 didn't spend it on emergencies. They spent it on opportunities. A certification that cost $1,500 and led to a meaningful salary increase. A course that opened a new direction. A small investment in something that seemed promising. The buffer wasn't consumed by the crisis it was built to handle. Instead, it provided the confidence to take steps that wouldn't have been possible, psychologically, not just financially, without it. There's also something that happens in negotiations, with employers, with service providers, with anyone, when you know you have a buffer. Desperation is visible. People can sense it. And when you're negotiating from a position of genuine need, that need affects the outcome. You accept terms you wouldn't otherwise accept. You don't push back when you should. You take the first offer because taking the first offer feels safer than risking the whole thing. A financial buffer removes a significant portion of that desperation. When you know that a negotiation that goes badly won't immediately cascade into a crisis, you negotiate differently. You're willing to walk away from something that doesn't serve you. You're willing to ask for more because the downside of asking isn't catastrophic. I've experienced this personally in conversations about rates, about terms, about compensation. The difference between negotiating from scarcity and negotiating from even modest security is real and measurable in outcomes. The $10,000 doesn't guarantee better negotiation results, but it removes a psychological constraint that was costing money without appearing anywhere on a spreadsheet. This is what I mean when I say the $10,000 isn't primarily about what you spend it on. It's about who you become when you know it's there. A calmer version of yourself, a more considered version, one who makes decisions based on what you actually want rather than what you can afford to risk. I want to say something specifically about this milestone for people in my situation. Supporting a family alone, being the only income for a household with children, changes the mathematics and the psychology of financial vulnerability in specific ways. When there's a partner who also earns, a bad month is stressful but manageable. There's redundancy built in. One income can cover the basics while the other situation resolves. When you're the only income, there's no redundancy. A bad month isn't half the problem, it's the whole problem. An interruption in earnings doesn't have a natural backup. This makes the $10,000 milestone, and honestly, more than $10,000, ideally 6 months of expenses, not just psychologically important, but practically essential. Because the thing you're building a buffer against isn't just your own discomfort, it's the stability of the people who depend on you. That changes the weight of the goal, and it changes the emotional texture of having it. When I think about what it means to have a real buffer as the sole provider for my family, as the person whose income is the only income, the feeling isn't primarily personal relief. It's more like, the kids are covered. Whatever happens to me, whatever changes, whatever goes wrong, there's time. There's runway. There's space to solve the problem without the solution having to arrive instantaneously. That specific feeling, for parents in this position, is worth more than almost any single purchase I can think of. I want to be honest about this because financial content often waves away the how too quickly. $10,000 is not a small amount. For most people, it doesn't appear quickly, and the advice to just cut coffee or find a side hustle, while not wrong exactly, skips past the real challenge, which is, how do you save consistently over the time it actually takes without burning out or giving up? A few things I've found genuinely useful. Start with an amount so small it's almost embarrassing. Not $500 a month, not even $200, whatever amount you can move automatically on payday without it creating real pressure on your month. For some people that's $50. For some people it's $100. The number doesn't matter as much as the automatic nature of it. The transfer happens before you make decisions about the money. It's already moved before the month begins. You live on what's left. The saving isn't something you have to decide to do. It's something that already happened. This matters because it removes the decision from the territory where willpower operates. It's no longer a contest between spending and saving. It's just done. The second thing, be patient with the timeline. At $100 a month, $10,000 takes over 8 years. That's discouraging to say, but here's what's also true. At $100 a month consistently, most people find the amount increases naturally over time. A raise comes, an expense disappears, an adjustment gets made, and the amount that moves automatically goes from $100 to $150 to $200. The timeline compresses as you go, not because you forced it, but because the habit is established and the identity is consolidating. And somewhere along the way, usually well before the 8 years, the account has enough in it to start feeling real, to start providing the psychological effects I've been describing. That threshold is different for everyone, but it's usually somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000 that people start noticing a genuine shift in how they feel about their finances. The $10,000 isn't the beginning of the shift, it's the consolidation of a shift that started earlier. I started this video at 3 a.m. with the feeling that most people who don't have a financial buffer know intimately. The running calculations, the low-level anxiety that doesn't resolve because there's nothing to resolve it. $10,000 changes that feeling. Not completely, not permanently. Financial life remains complicated and uncertain, regardless of what's in the account. But the specific 3 a.m. anxiety, the one that comes from knowing that a single unexpected event could immediately cascade into a real problem, That one gets quieter, and quieter is worth a lot. I want to end with something I said at the beginning, but mean it more specifically now. The money is not the most important part. Who you become while building it is. The patience developed across months of consistent saving. The identity of someone who does this, who builds, who protects the gap. That identity, and the habits it produces, is what makes the next $10,000 possible, and the one after that. The buffer doesn't make you rich, but it makes you someone who thinks differently about money, who responds differently to uncertainty, who makes different decisions at the grocery store and in job interviews, and at 3 a.m. when the calculations start. That person, over time, builds something real, not through a single dramatic decision, through 100 quiet, consistent ones. If this landed, stick around. Thanks for watching.